Look, people are being deplatformed, but let's get together and celebrate our free press, where journalism's not a crime, where Biden and Jen Psaki, people that have worked for media, people that have worked for government, can cozy up and celebrate how free our speech is. Have you noticed any censorship anywhere lately? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining us on this voyage to truth and freedom. Truth that will not be easily won in a world that tells you that it's interested in freedom of speech, while all the time looking for new ways to censor, surveil, shut down, and control. You're aware, aren't you, that the White House press conference dinner was a great orgasmic gala of agreement that what a free, wonderful world we're all living in together. Meanwhile, there's no one mentioned Julian Assange or Jamal Khashoggi, or the fact that we're continually being censored and there's such limited freedom of speech. On this platform, you know people get kicked off, not for hate speech, for saying stuff that's just against community guidelines, which are peculiar, ever-shifting, difficult to track, and in some cases, literally Kafkaesque. If you haven't turned on the notification bell yet, turn on the notification bell right now. We need you. That's the truth of it. We need you. Without your support, we're vulnerable and in danger. The movement for free speech is under threat everywhere. Unless we have access to you as an audience, unless we have integrity between us, I think we're all in a great deal of trouble. And let's have a look at why. You remember when Jen Psaki was the press spokesperson for the White House, where every day during COVID or whatever, she'd turn up and say, oh, this is what we're doing and this is what we're not doing. Oh, you can ask a question. Do you mind if we get that question written down in advance? Give the poor old fella some chance to understand it. So Jen Psaki now, of course, by weird coincidence, has her own TV show on MSNBC. Weird that. Almost as if it's like easy to go from working for the government to MSNBC. In spite of the fact that at that White House press conference dinner, it was like, oh, you hold us to account. Jefferson said if it was a free speech or government, you'd take free speech and free press over government. All that. Well, that ain't what we're discussing here. What we're discussing is government and media that operate as one system of propaganda and promulgation of convenient information, censorship of inconvenient information. And if you don't believe me, and let me know in the chat in the comments if you don't, have a look at this, because this is going to knock your knickers down, mate.
One of the fun parts, if you will, the responsibilities of the White House Correspondents Association is this dinner.
Yeah.
April 29th, the White House Correspondents Association dinner is happening. Yes, Nerd Prom is what we call it.
Nerd Prom. Julian Assange, still in prison. Mention it if you care about free speech.
I remember during the Trump administration, Donald Trump, then President Trump, did not attend the dinner.
Let me know in the chat and the comments if you think Trump's non-attendance signifies a relationship that's actually more appropriate. Trump got blasted by the media regularly. He hated them, they hated him. That's more the kind of relationship that Jefferson was espousing. Not all cozying up to each other, saying what great advocates for freedom of speech they are. Meanwhile, not mentioning Assange, not mentioning increased censorship laws by all sorts of means, not mentioning that the mainstream media makes more money from selling your data now than it does from telling you the truth, not mentioning, as Elon Musk famously did on Twitter, that many of these organizations receive significant funding from the government and are happy to parrot their line on most subjects. This now is propaganda overload. We're at peak propaganda.
When the Biden-Harris administration came into office, obviously President Biden did revive that tradition of attending the dinner. Why is it important for the sitting president of the United States of America, you think, to go to the dinner?
It's hugely important because it shows respect and honors the work of people who are in the media.
Respect and honor. Like all the respect and honor that the New York Times showed to the story of Jack Teixeira. The New York Times collaborated with the FBI and the CIA. This is not a situation where the word honor should be on everybody's lips. The taste of disgust should be in all of our mouths.
And it shows that in a democracy, you can disagree. You may disagree with their coverage. You can get that all out in the funny part of your speech. And oftentimes, the speech that a president delivers is one that has all sorts of funny critiques or funny jokes about media organizations.
Didn't notice any funny jokes about Hunter Biden's laptop, a story that was kept out of the mainstream media in the build-up to the election. In fact, the CIA, the deep state, were utilized to help repress and discredit that information before its revelation. The idea that what we have is a free media and a transparent government is plainly risible. And if you are looking for evidence of that fact, look no further than Edward Snowden, still exiled in Russia because he heroically revealed that we were being lied to and spied on to an unprecedented degree. And that's not just your country, it's my country, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all collaborating and sharing information. What's been revealed is we have anything but transparency, anything but press freedom.
Probably gets them some things off their chest. By the way, those speeches take years off of your life if you were in the press or communications office. Hard to deliver a funny speech. But a good chunk of the speech is also on the value of media.
They're trying to keep it like this is a friendly, jocular communication between power and those that report on power, and that the tone of this friendly, communicative, apparently transparent tone tells us that everything's okay. You know that if you speak out against the interests of the powerful, you are going to get in serious trouble. We on this channel are extremely cautious about the types of information that we use and the way that we convey it, just so that we can keep the lights on.
And freedom of press and how important it is to a democracy. And it is honoring the work, the blood, sweat, and tears of the people in the room.
Well, I'll tell you some blood, sweat, and tears that you could be honouring. Jamal Khashoggi's. It's all over the floor of an embassy in Istanbul.
There's also scholarships and awards that are given.
Whoa, those scholarships, and I suppose there's no strings attached. Who provides those scholarships? What type of reporting do you get from the journalists who receive them?
But even just being present and being there as a president sends that message to the media that you value what they do.
I think so. And especially, I mean, I think we often forget here in America, because there is a free press, a fair press at the cornerstone of our democracy.
Yes, cornerstone. Free speech, very cornerstone of our democracy. It's not like new ways to censor. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation are literally being created before our very eyes. It's not like we've just had the Twitter file revelations that shows you the degree to which the CIA and FBI have infiltrated not only social media, but presumably mainstream media as well, in order to dictate narratives and suppress narratives that they don't like, even, as has now been admitted, repressing and censoring true information that they did not like. You can't sit on the TV and say all of this stuff unless, of course, you yourself are part of that propaganda.
Cornerstone of our democracy is that journalists can ask the most powerful people in America, whether they be presidents or CEOs, some of the toughest questions.
As long as you give them those tough questions in advance. Hey, we're going to be asking you some pretty tough questions. Oh, God, what are they? Well, this is the question, this is what the journalist looks like, and this is how you pronounce their name. Traitor to journalism. That's traitor to journalism.
I think we forget that around the world that is not the case. And there's so many journalists whose freedom is being just trampled on across the globe.
It would be good if the countries where the journalists are being trampled on aligned with countries that the US imperialist system wanted to invade anyway, wouldn't it? God, that'd be so convenient, but that would be just too much of a coincidence if the exact countries that America have been planning to invade were also the ones about freedom. Oh, God. Wouldn't even like to wish for that.
Right, and in fact, when it's adversarial...
Adversarial? The only adversarialism will come if they scratch each other's back too hard, or if you feel a bit of a tooth during fellatio. There's no adversity between the press and power. They're working together to keep us spellbound. Let me know in the chat in the comments if you agree.
Sometimes in the briefing room at the State Department or the Defense Department or the White House, or with spokespeople for the Vice President and others, that is democracy working. That is the reporters being able to push back on a spokesperson, ask them tough questions, right?
The only times they push back, you finish the joke.
And the spokesperson can sometimes push back at them and try to provide information to the best of their ability. That does not exist in China or Russia or a lot of other authoritarian countries.
That's convenient because actually we're having a proxy war with Russia that's quite profitable, and we're looking to start a proxy war with China that will also be profitable. So it's good that they're baddies.
Even in those moments of adversarialness, it's working. It's democracy working.
Yeah, even those moments of adversarialness, like when Julian Assange, for example, he's in Belmarsh, slowly atrophying and dying, squinting into his dark cell. Oh, that's democracy working. And when Jamal Khashoggi's being sawn up in an embassy and we're told that Saudi Arabia will be made a pariah before Joe Biden goes over there and fist bumps, that is democracy working. Edward Snowden shivering away there in Russia, oh, that terrible Russian country, that is democracy working. And when people are getting kicked off YouTube for having conversations, that is democracy working. Democracy is working so well, we should go around the world finding places that don't have it and force them to have it, whether they want it or not, democratically, for freedom. But I'm probably imagining this as some sort of conspiracy theorist. After all, look at what I'm wearing and judge me on that, rather on the stuff I'm saying. Let's have a look at the actual relationships between people that work at the White House and people that work in the media. And if we find those relationships, well, that would be evidence, I guess, right? The current press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, is a former analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, and the last press secretary, Jen Psaki, that was Jen there, now has her own show on MSNBC. Prior to her stint as White House press secretary, Psaki worked as a CNN analyst, and before that she was spokesperson for the State Department, so she moved effortlessly between the State and MSNBC and CNN and back to the State, all the while rigorously questioning, oh no, come on, let's really give these guys hell, oh no, back over here. Everywhere you look, you can find extensive entanglements between the US government and the news media outlets that Westerners look to for information about the world. And that's before you even get into the way the plutocratic class, which owns and influences the US media, is also not meaningfully separate from the US government. When corporations are part of the government, corporate media is state media. And that, my dear friends, if you ask me, is closer to fascism than any of the other things you hear described as fascism by that portion of the media. Now let's focus on the celebratory tone that's deployed when talking about freedom of press, freedom of speech, and bad countries like China and Russia. And observe carefully what actually happens if you are a journalist that speaks out against power. The annual dinner of the White House Correspondents Association is an occasion for the media elite and top politicians in Washington to schmooze and declare their mutual solidarity. That is what it is. Our solidarity is mutual. Shall we have a schmooze? It's not like, oh, like stags tussling by a brook to work out what's best for America. They have the same interest. Otherwise, the whole way through that White House press conference dinner, they'll be going, whoa, Julian Assange, Jamal Khashoggi, what's going on? The censorship, misinformation, setting up new ways of controlling it. Is it right that we're even selling the private information of our audience without making it clear to them that's what we're doing? Why are platforms like Rumble being shut down in France? Why can't Russia Today be viewed and people decide for themselves whether it's propaganda? That is not freedom of speech. I don't know what it is. You let me know what it is, but it ain't freedom of speech. This is usually couched in the language of defense of the First Amendment, although that constitutional provision has been systematically trampled on by administration after administration in the interests of American imperialism, such as the current war, I would contest, between Ukraine and Russia. Is that being used for imperial corporate American interests? Sort of looks like it when you look at the way that the Pentagon budget ends up being apportioned out. What about the semiconductor war that's being agitated for involving Taiwan and China? Illegal government spying, police violence, data capture, censorship, and a rise in protest laws are everyday practices in America, and the corporate media generally passes over them in silence as long as its own financial interests are not harmed. Plain fact. The reason that the media is not attacking the state and other corporations on these matters is because they are able to carry on sitting behind desks, drinking from a mug, all cozy, all happy, no problem. There was more than the usual measure of such hypocrisy at Saturday night's annual dinner of the White House Correspondents Association as President Joe Biden and the assembled members of the political and media elite pretended to defend freedom of the press, but only when it serves the foreign policy interests of American imperialism. In a way, it's just like the Met Gala. People are just dressed up, celebrating stuff that's nothing to do with what's actually happening, and is doubling down on the systems of nihilism and deceit that govern our valueless culture as we slide into some kind of moral oblivion and potentially other types of cultural and maybe even ecological oblivion as well. Most presidential appearances at the dinner, attended by every president in recent years except Donald Trump, have been characterized by scripted remarks making fun of the audience, the president's political opponents and critics, and the president himself. But Biden devoted the bulk of his remarks to a lengthy declaration of his opposition to the repressive measures taken against journalists in Russia, China, Iran, Syria, and Venezuela. Sometimes I've heard of those countries. I keep hearing those countries. Russia, China, Iran, Syria, and Venezuela. Yeah, they must be like freedom-hating countries or something, or must have oil a bit. I don't know. No, it's freedom-hating. They're freedom-hating and undemocratic, I think, is what it is. Let me know in the chat what you think it is. And pledges to devote US diplomatic efforts to winning the release of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, recently arrested on bogus spying charges in Russia, and other American prisoners of the Putin regime. Wrong to arrest Evan Gershkovich. Obviously, he should be freed. The coincidence between the list of countries guilty of violating press freedom and the list of countries targeted by American imperialism for subversion and overthrow was obvious. Wait a minute, this list here of countries that you say aren't free and ones where you have an imperial agenda, it's the same list. Yeah, but the list got different title at the top of it. This one's countries that we're going to overthrow, and this one's countries that don't have a free press. Yeah, but it's the same countries. It's a different list, and I need you to believe that it's different. Otherwise, you're not a journalist. You're a disinformationer. Right, so check it out that night where Biden was all cozy and kooky and funny and cute.
I love NPR because they whisper into the mic like I do.
Check this. Biden made no reference, for example, to the murder of Washington Post commentator Jamal Khashoggi, killed and dismembered inside the consulate of Saudi Arabia in the Turkish city of Istanbul. That's a pretty bad thing to happen to a journalist, I think. Remember, please try to remember that when Biden was campaigning for the presidency, he said,
make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
But then remember, in government, they did not do that. This kind of madness where you have a whole evening dedicated to freedom of the press and you don't mention Julian Assange or Jamal Khashoggi, what is it trying to make you go mad or something? Khashoggi, an advisor turned critic of the Saudi monarchy, was targeted by the de facto Saudi ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whose security chief sent the hit squad and directed its actions. Well, I only sent a security chief and directed its actions. Other than that, I had nothing to do with that murder and dismemberment. Oh, well, come on into America. Fist bump. Biden claimed during the 2020 election campaign that he would turn the Saudi leader into a pariah. Instead, in pursuit of greater Saudi oil production, he went cap in hand to Riyadh for talks with the prince/assassin. So there you go. That's the reality of politics. We all know that's the reality. Why are we pretending it's anything else? Oh, we're giving Joe Biden a real test. You know, we come at him a bit, he comes at us a little bit. It's very much like Marvin Hagler versus Thomas Hearns. Who's going to win? Well, both of you, because you're both fucking liars. But the most obvious case of a double standard was the one that involves the Biden administration directly, the persecution of Julian Assange. Now, I've heard people say that Julian Assange is like a right-wing issue now. Julian Assange revealed that there was malfeasance in the Middle Eastern wars, that civilians were killed, that you can't trust your government, that you're being spied on, lied to. Is that right-wing now? Let me know in the chat. I don't know what all these words mean. 3 minutes into his remarks to the Saturday night festivities, Biden declared journalism is not a crime. It is if you do it properly. The formulation seemed a perverse restatement of a declaration issued by a half dozen major world newspapers, including the New York Times last December, when they called on the Biden administration to drop charges against Assange because publishing is not a crime. And if it were, they'd be guilty of it. But how the New York Times backing up that claim that Assange should not have to endure the espionage charges levelled against him because publishing is not a crime? Let's have a look. It is noteworthy that in their coverage of the Correspondents' dinner, neither the Times nor the Washington Post or any other mainstream publication made any mention of Assange or the contradiction between Biden's declaration of fidelity to the First Amendment and the continued drive of his administration to extradite and jail Assange, who published information. They didn't mention it because what they're doing, what they're continually doing, is establishing the frame of what can be talked about and what is not allowed to be talked about. And they're doing it actually brilliantly. Nor did any media correspondents or management, the bulk of the audience at the dinner, seek to raise the issue there. What a surprise. 7 Democratic members of Congress, including all 5 members of the Democratic Socialists of America, recently sent a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland urging him to drop prosecution of Assange. None of these representatives sought to raise the issue at the Correspondents' dinner, which took place only 4 days before World Press Freedom Day, as designated by the United Nations. Nothing means anything, does it? Did you know it was World Press Freedom Day? And to celebrate World Press Freedom Day, we are going to chop up these Saudi Arabian journalists in a little bit. And this Australian journalist, we're going to leave him in prison. And this doctor on YouTube, we're going to ban him for a week. Also, anyone, anywhere who tries to say anything that could impede our ability to colonize not only the world and its resources, but also the consciousness of its inhabitants will go to jail. Happy Freedom Day, everyone. Don't you dare ruin another Freedom Day, Lisa. Later in his remarks, Biden flattered the press, declaring, "You make it possible for ordinary citizens to question authority." No, you make it impossible. You make it impossible. That's the opposite. What is this, a Seinfeld episode where you do the exact opposite of what you're saying you're doing? They do not do that. They criticize you. They find ways to delegitimize dissenting voices. They censor, they smear. That is not what they do, is it? Actually, the American corporate media has abandoned even a token commitment to such an oppositional stance toward the US government. Yeah, that sounds more like it. The Times, which sets the agenda for the daily coverage in the American media, is little more than an adjunct to the CIA and Pentagon on national security issues, particularly the war in Ukraine. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? And we now know why, because there's deep infiltration and in some cases funding, and there's an alliance of ideologies, and it's simply not separate. When National Guard airman and IT specialist Jack Buddy Boy, as they call him, Texera, released top secret Pentagon documents on the internet, the Times tracked him down and published his name, enabling the FBI to swoop in and arrest the 21-year-old soldier only hours later. That's literal collaboration, isn't it? The Times published his name, the FBI arrested him. They're like little nerdy point Poindexter. Sir, we found out who's been smoking behind the bike sheds. It was Buddy Boy Texera. Excellent work. Well done, Martin. Biden's paean to the American media and his declaration of devotion to the First Amendment were followed by a series of obvious and banal jokes, largely at the expense of Fox News.
Fox News owned by Dominion Voting Systems.
Yawn. As well as a few references to advanced age.
The same over the hill. Don Lemon would say that's a man in his prime.
Ha 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 ha, he's old. As though that was the only issue standing in the way of his re-election campaign. He made no mention of the war in Ukraine, which every day threatens to escalate into a nuclear exchange between the US and Russia, which remains a deadly threat to the world's population. Possibly because it would have ruined the vibe, along with any mentions of Assange, Khashoggi, or the truth more broadly. But here, on our channel, we have an obligation to try to get in the mud with you and understand what the hell is happening. Why is our felt daily emotional reality so different from what they're telling us? Whether you're watching the Met Gala or seeing people getting banned or seeing people getting smeared or listening to people telling you how free you are and how much freedom of speech you've got, why does your feeling of reality not match this peculiar matrix that they are encircling us with and closing down around us? Why? Because it's simply not true. Simply because change is trying to be born, they're trying to stifle it, and one of the ways that they stifle change is by controlling the media space and what's permissible to discuss within it. What I believe is that we need more free media spaces like this. We need more ability to openly communicate so we discover how similar to one another we are where it matters, and that our differences from one another are quite glorious. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Turn on the notification bell and subscribe. But more important than that, please stay free.